Hi, I'm Will.
And I'm Luke.
And this is Will and Luke Discuss,
a vodcast
and podcast
where we discuss content related to psychology,
personal growth,
self-development,
and well-being. This episode, we're discussing
Compassion-Focused Therapy, Distinctive Features by Paul Gilbert. Hello, mate. How you doing?
Yeah, not bad. You right?
Yeah, I'm doing well, thanks. You excited for the book?
Yeah, keen. It was a really dense book. I think it was only a couple hundred pages, but I feel like I just made hundreds of notes. I was kind of a bit confused where I wanted to start, but I feel we'll give it a good crack. And looking forward to it. I know it's an area of work that you've practiced in your current work, so I'm intrigued to kind of take some wisdom from you, and I guess share some insights or things I found interesting.
Awesome. Yeah, it's short, but it's dense. And so I'll give a bit of a summary about what we're talking about and we'll dig in. So compassion-focused therapy, it's a modality or a theory of psychotherapy founded by Paul Gilbert, Professor Paul Gilbert. He lives in the same city as me here in Derby. He's been a lecturer at the university for a few decades. And so he founded this theory based around compassion. And so this book, it's like it was published in 2010, and it's part of a series of psychotherapy books called Distinctive Features, which tries to like reduce an entire therapy down, like you say, to like a 200-page book. So it's like got 30 small chapters, and the book's in two halves. So it's one half's the theory, the other half is the practice, and it attempts to reduce like decades of research down into a pamphlet that can stick in your pocket. And so, yes, like you say, it's very dense, but it's good stuff.
And is this something that you use in your current practice, or kind of informs aspects of it, or is it the main modality you use at the moment?
I would say like I definitely use it and it informs a lot of what I do. I'm not sure I'd go as far as to say it's a main modality. I integrate quite a few things, but like I think, I could start off by saying this, that although it has a name, it's called compassion-focused therapy. I've heard Paul Gilbert say that I might misquote him, but he said something along the lines of he didn't really like the idea of labeling another therapy because there were already like hundreds, right? He was just trying to pull in evolutionary research on psychology and how it informs how he might do psychotherapy. But in order to get research funding, you're much more likely to get it if you label your therapy. And so like you had to give it a name. So it's become like another therapy. But I think from his perspective, he's trying to help integrate like CBT, Gestalt and attachment theory. He's trying to pull stuff together rather than, tear bits apart. So I suppose on the back of that, yes, I use a lot of the theory that informs this therapy to inform my work. But I don't think it's necessarily the initial intention was for it to be a standalone therapy anyway. Like you can do a training in it, and I think you can do a postgrad in compassion-focused therapy, but they would expect you to already have a therapy background to do that.
Yeah, okay. I found it interesting kind of thinking about what other modalities would inform this. So certainly kind of aspects of acceptance and commitment therapy for sure. CBT approaches, metacognition approaches as well. I thought it was interesting the part where he says that we talks about how often when people are kind of experiencing emotional difficulty, or they're struggling with overthinking, anxiousness, ruminative thoughts, troublesome mental states, that CBT for some people only goes so far. So it's almost kind of like you can kind of rationalize things, or make changes to negative thinking and introduce more positive thoughts. But at the end of it, people can still not feel okay. Like you can kind of logically get your head around something or kind of rationalize something, but essentially it's more the experience of feeling like something's changed, and the experience that you feel better, and there's been some sort of experiential learning as part of the process. And that seemed like quite a key focus of what he was trying to get across. I know that's something you've communicated to me before. I'm wondering if you could expand on that.
Yeah, I think that is like the key point of what had him go off into sort of a more research for psychotherapy because he is a clinical psychologist, so would have been taught probably, I'm guessing, CBT as his main theory that informed his clinical work. And he describes, like, well, some people you can get them to let me say it this way. So sometimes this is referred to as what's called a third wave CBT, and also acceptance and commitment therapy is referred to as a third wave CBT. So the first wave is behavior therapy. It's like challenge your fears, like by doing things. If you're scared of dating, go ask someone on a date and just keep doing that until you overcome it, right? It's exposure. And then the second wave is the cognitive therapy, which you just described, which is like, well, if we can work out the assumptions and beliefs underpinning my behavior and challenge those, then everything else will change and I'll feel better. So work out what my thoughts, what assumptions am I making about this situation? What beliefs do I have about myself? Recognize, oh, they're not rational, challenge them. And the theory would be that I then feel better. But back to your point, sometimes that doesn't happen for people, right? Sometimes I can think, right, well, okay, it's not rational to think that everyone's judging me in the supermarket or whatever. And I understand now that I'm not worthless, but I still just feel the same. So from that place, it's like, well, what next then? So these third wave CBTs are not about challenging the thoughts that you have or the beliefs you have, but changing your relationship with them. So in acceptance and commitment therapy, it would be about, diffusing from them, taking a step back and being more mindful. And here it's about changing your internal relationship to have a kinder, more compassionate relationship with yourself. And that's not so much in the words you say, but much more in the attitude and sort of the internal tone of voice and relationship you have with yourself, rather than the words or the thoughts themselves.
It's like a more compassionate way of engaging with these feelings and these, whether they're terrifying emotions or difficult emotions, as opposed to kind of rationalizing your way out of them. I wonder if you could just touch on the fact there's something I think you might be able to better explain, is that he hasn't totally written off CBT as a useful approach within the compassion focused therapy framework. I think he's still saying that we still need kind of our rational mind and to be able to kind of adhere to reality as part of the process. I'm wondering if I've kind of gotten that right, or
definitely. So
what aspects of CBT inform this alongside the compassionate, warm approach to self.
Yeah. So it's additive. So it doesn't challenge anything from CBT. It's not saying that's wrong or we need to get rid of any of that. We keep it all in, but we inform it all with like if you're in an actual therapy setting, your relationship between the therapist and the client is really important. So if you come across as critical whilst you're doing these behavioral experiments, it's going to go to shit. and also your relationship with yourself is key. So we're still face your fears, still challenge your thinking and work out your assumptions and your beliefs and all that. But we're on top of that, we're informing that with an internal attitude towards ourselves that's more friendly, positive, encouraging, the way you would treat a friend, or as I suppose as Jordan Peterson put it, even if people might treat their pets better than the way they treat themselves sometimes. So it's like having an attitude towards yourself that you're someone worthy of respect, worthy of looking after, and worthy of encouragement.
Something I guess kind of reading through this and picking up felt like quite a key aspect of what we're talking about here today is kind of these three interacting systems within us that Paul describes as kind of within the realm of like affect regulation. So he says we've got the threat and self-protection system, we've got the incentive and resource seeking drive excitement system, and then the soothing contentment and safeness system. So that last one is kind of very key to compassion focused therapy. I'm wondering whether you might be able to kind of just outline what these three systems are and kind of which ones we tend to get stuck in, and what he refers to as kind of the way out of getting stuck in, particularly the threat mindset, and kind of moving into more soothing and contentment one. I think that might be a good explanation. And I guess later on we can get into some of the kind of the techniques and the the how-tos of that.
Cover the theory, then cover the practice. Yeah, and I know we've talked about therapy so far, but I think a reason we chose this for like the podcast is because this therapy is also really good as just like a self-help guide. Like you don't necessarily need any therapy to learn this theory and apply the practice to yourself. So I think that's probably the angle we're taking at it today. But yeah, this it's all based on evolutionary theory, right? And so these 3 emotional systems you just laid out, it's a way of like thinking about our emotions, not just about how they feel, but about what their function is. And so obviously, like all animals, we have emotions that help protect us. So he calls these our threat emotions. So if we're under attack, if we think we can escape, we'll feel fear, so we can run and hide. If we feel as if we can't escape, but we are bigger and stronger, we might feel anger and attack our way out the situation. If something needs to be avoided because it's infectious, we might feel disgust. Or if we're completely powerless, we can't fight, we can't flee, we might sort of shut down, we might get depressed, we might become, play dead or become sort of catatonic. So we have all these emotions and they're all very different, but they're all essentially serving the same function, which is threat. And then, like you say, we've got our drive system. That's to help us like get up and do stuff, get stuff done, get resources, get sexual partners, like build shelters. I'm speaking sort of tribally here, but then we still utilize these emotions for, I suppose, our working lives. And I suppose what probably gets most focus in this compassion focused therapy is that last one, the soothing system. So when we don't need to get out of any danger, it's safe. And when we've got all our stuff done, it's like, can we actually find a space where we can feel relaxed, contentment, like be able to sort of chill out and feel just sort of warm and at peace with not having to do anything in particular. And these are the type of emotions you, I suppose, would feel that they're heightened when you're in a safe relationship. So, it's the end of a long day and you're cuddled up with someone you're in love with. Like they're the feelings we're talking about in this soothing system. And so basically all our emotions fit somewhere within these 3 systems. And it's a way of seeing them, not just as how they feel, but what their actual function are in our lives.
I guess he puts a warning out about kind of the ways we get stuck in certain types of systems. So kind of like, what's he say here, like the frequency of activation of the threat system can be linked to external cues or internal cues. So we can find ourselves stuck in the threat system when there isn't necessarily a real external threat, but then we can perpetuate those by kind of feeling that there is an internal threat that we keep feeding, and that prevents us from accessing this soothing system, which is going to be the antidote to that. And I think something that kind of like stood out to me in this is kind of things like overthinking, ruminating, and aspects of ACT that kind of help us kind of get out of that system. Kind of like moving towards more like value-based activities, and kind of assessing thoughts and worries and challenging situations through that lens. Like, is this kind of helpful? Using some of those more rational tools as well. That's a way of kind of getting yourself kind of out of that threat system into a place where you can kind of access the safety and soothing system. So I think I kind of threw a few different things in there, but I guess I'm just kind of highlighting ways in which we can get stuck in the threat system. I guess ways out of that.
Yeah, well, he kind of sums up a lot of mental health problems as this, right? So if this 3 affect regulation systems is one key bit of this theory, another key bit of this theory is what he calls old brain and new brain. It's just a way of splitting our brain functions in half between stuff that any old mammal does and stuff that only human beings do, basically. And so any mammal will have a threat system, a drive system, and a soothing system. But we as human beings, as you just pointed out, can have this capacity for abstract thought. So we can overthink, we can fantasize about the future, we can ruminate about the past, we can... And these emotional systems basically don't discriminate between what's out there in front of us and what we think in our minds. So I think he the example he uses in the book is like, if you're with a sexual partner and like you can get aroused and different hormones are going to go, your body's going to change, and it's going to, your physiological and emotional system will change because of this sort of a external environment of like being in a sexual situation. But as we all know, we can be on our own in a room and just fantasize a sexual situation, and the same stuff will happen. We'll kick off different hormones around our body. We'll feel different feelings. And so that's purely just with imagination. And basically the same thing happens when we fantasize about stuff going wrong, when we ruminate about what could have been different, when we beat ourselves up in our mind or overthink. Now we're in a place where the threat system, which originally evolved for just one-off dangerous external situations, we can now just constantly trigger by worrying, ruminating, overthinking, and beating ourselves up. And this is kind of like the fundamental diagnosis of a lot of mental health problems, I feel he's probably saying.
And also, I guess that kind of like leads on to what he's saying about how when that threat system's activated, it's not just kind of a mental distress that we're going through. It can kind of emanate in the body as well. So there's like physical symptoms we experience, whether that's kind of racing heart, like flushes of emotion, kind of like tension, like multiple things he lists there. And I think part of the soothing system and the compassion techniques, I suppose we'll talk about, is kind of like entering into the body and like soothing on a like a physiological level, as well as kind of providing more like mentally soothing activities as well.
So everything we learned from that Robert Sapolsky Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers book, just constantly triggering all that in our bodies. And it's well, reading that book will scare the pants off you and convince you that you're going to kill yourself by doing that. But if you want to stop doing that, Paul Gilbert's recommending we find a way to engage the soothing system, which is our natural inbuilt evolutionary system for calming our threat system. And even though that evolved in relationships, so originally the soothing system, like we evolved such that if another person were to be calm, were to literally stroke us, to give us a kind word, to protect us, that was what this evolved in order to soothe us. But now, because of our new brain, we can serve that function for ourselves.
So it was interesting. Me and my partner had a dog round, and we've got 2 cats. And one of the cats was like so tense the moment it saw the dog, and it stayed in this like really tense state for probably like the 24 hours that the dog was here. But now the dog's gone, the cat is just like totally settled down. Just kind of reminded me of the Robert Sapolsky, how kind of once the threat's gone, it's kind of immediately just relaxed. The moment the dog was out of the room, the cat just like relaxed and calm. It was just interesting. It's kind of like how we perpetuate that. And I guess as humans, like we have a capability to like perpetuate that, like mentally through like negative
I mean, if that was
ruminations and that sort of thing,
we'd be like, when's that dog coming back? Like, oh my god, remember when that dog was here? And just like keeping this stuff going. No, it's not. No, the cat's not worried about that. So that's a really nice example of the threat and soothing system.
So maybe think a little bit about the chimp paradox as well. The monkey mind, and I think that there's definitely some aspects in here which I quite liked, that kind of fitted a bit around kind of growth mindset and fixed mindset, around compassionate self-correction and shame-based self-attacking. So I'll just park that there for us to revisit a bit later on when we get into the techniques. But I suppose I guess I'm just kind of flicking through some of my notes so I can just see there's some stuff around. He wants to clarify the approach and how kind of there's like a general kind of attitude in which to approach this work. Kind of from understanding that our mind is not our design, it's out of our control, thus it's not our fault when we start to feel what we feel. And I guess with this in mind, it helps like de-shame when we're feeling a certain way, or the clients we're working with are feeling a certain way. And he says it's better to look at our threat, excitement and soothing systems and how they're interacting and how to work with each other. So I suppose that's a useful framework in which to look at things when you're interacting with the client, or you're using this as a self-help tool. It's like, what is being activated in this moment, and how can one shift from one to the other? And he's kind of saying that that's your responsibility to cultivate this, like to cultivate this practice. And I like in the final chapter, I just highlighted something. He says, that it's we have it's kind of like up to us, like what sort of mind do we want to have? What sort of kind of system do we want to operate out on a day-to-day level? Like, do we want to be constantly operating out of like, kind of a tension, or, a threat system, or do we want to have the skills and the knowledge to be able to soothe ourselves no matter kind of what life throws at us?
Yeah, lovely. Yeah. So it's like, so on the one hand, we didn't design any of this stuff, right? We didn't design the fact we have a threat system and we didn't design the fact we have this capacity for rumination and thinking about the future and self-criticism. We have no control over the situation we're born into and the kind of things that train these different emotional systems once we're out in the world. And so, it's a way of, if we find ourselves blaming ourselves for our own emotional problems, all that's going to do is perpetuate the threat system. And so he's kind of using evolutionary theory to say, like, look, this isn't your fault. Like, you didn't design any of this stuff. You've just found yourself in this position, in the same way as if, like, I think he used the analogy of like he had like a back problem, right? And it's like he didn't design the human skeleton, and he didn't design his genetics or the experiences he's been through in life. Like, a lot of that just wasn't up to him. So that's the one side. That's the not shaming yourself. But on the other side, no one else is going to do anything about it. So it's still down to you. Like, you're the one that needs to go to the physiotherapist and see if what's wrong with your back and work out what's happened and work out what you can do. And you can still do that from an encouraging and compassionate place to yourself. So on the one hand, this stuff isn't our fault, but on the other hand, it's up to us to take responsibility to kind of learn how our minds work, why we tick, and how we can help ourselves, because no one else is going to be able to do it for us.
And I guess that kind of ties in elements of the 7 habits of highly effective people. Kind of like you're looking at your circle of control, your circle of influence, as well as the acceptance part of acceptance and commitment theory. Acceptance of the things we cannot change, knowledge to know the
Pillars
things
of
we
self-esteem,
can.
Responsibility. All ties in.
There's a lot of ties in here, actually. I think it's nice. It's a nice one because it doesn't hide this fact, but it does certainly like tie in aspects of lots of other kind of books that we've read and kind of covered on the podcast. Yes, I'm sure we'll tie some links as we go along. I was just interested. I wrote down here the what compassion focused therapy sees as the mechanisms of change. I think that might be quite a good one to kind of throw out there, and then maybe get into some of the techniques. So what he says is, maybe I'll read each one, and then if there's anything to add, go for it. So sees mechanisms of change as disengage from internal stimulators of threat. So self-criticism, rumination, anger, and refocus on compassion, insights, and feelings. So that's the first one.
So stop. Just stop triggering ourselves internally. Stop it. But not just stop triggering ourselves, but also engage the soothing system internally by the techniques we can talk about.
Compassionately stand back from difficult thoughts, and this involves utilizing the observing self. And also putting here as well, like mentalizing. So kind of like
mindfulness and that. Exactly. That's what we need to say. It's a very sophisticated podcast.
Activate the soothing system as a threat regulator, and switching to compassionate refocusing and imagery.
Very similar to the first point you made, but throw in the imagery bit. Exactly. And then to engage with aversive inner experiences like bad memories by developing a compassionate base. So I think this kind of like these 4 things kind of set the scene for some of the I suppose techniques and ways of approaching and strategies to approach this. So that last one was kind of like be able to soothe yourself before going into like distressing or traumatic memories.
Yes, yeah, and I think that,
don't
one of
enter them from a threat-based place to start with. Yeah.
Yes. Set the scene before you kind of approach these things. Yeah, because we all know what it's like when you're kind of trying to solve a problem when you're
really stressed
and
out,
already irritable or already stressed or something. Yeah. Cool. All right. I guess something I wanted to kind of speak about was kind of getting onto some of the mindsets and approaches we can use with clients or with ourselves in regards to compassion-focused therapy, is something around the compassionate self-correction as opposed to shame-based self-attacking. Mm-hmm. So this kind of did tie a bit to me with kind of like the growth mindset versus the fixed mindset. Yeah. So like a more growth mindset would kind of be around the aspects, kind of desire to improve, being future-focused, knowing that things can change, kind of trying to utilize the more positive aspects of ourselves and not focusing on the negative. Whereas, shame-based self-attacking is kind of, things will always be this way, kind of getting stuck in frustration and contempt, deficit-focused, fear of failure, so not wanting to kind of like push out the boat, and kind of like a sort of a desire to avoid things as opposed to seeking growth. So suppose, just kind of throw that out there, compassionate self-correction as a tool in which to move from the threat system to the more soothing system.
Yeah, well, it still sounds quite abstract, doesn't it? Someone's compassionate self-correction. I'm thinking that probably involves an element of mindfulness where you can actually notice, oh crap, I'm doing this thing. It reminds me of what he sometimes calls threat-based drive. So where we are in our drive system, but we're only in it being whipped from behind by a threat system. Like I must achieve, or I'm an awful failure. Like I must get this done because so-and-so is going to have a go at me if I don't. And so like we can get a lot of stuff done without a soothing system just by our like threat system whipping our drive system into shape, but it's an exhausting place to be. So I suppose if we can raise awareness to that and just notice for a start using this theory and using mindfulness skills that it's happening, and then try to redirect that inner life to being like, well, I suppose talk to ourselves in a way that can be encouraging, but also soothing and kind, and recognize, look, whatever this threat is, it's not the end of the world. If either you've got this or it doesn't matter that much or you'll be all right or something like that.
Yeah. There's some attributes of a compassionate mind that he speaks about as well. So kind of aspects of this are, sympathy, being able to actually, as a starting place, being able to kind of understand other people's distress as a starting point for understanding your own. So, and then kind of insight into how your own mind works. So part of that, mentalizing, attributes of distress tolerance, empathy, being non-judgmental, being sensitive to your own feelings and needs, and having, kind of motivation and intentionality. And he's saying that these are the attributes that kind of inform the skills we can use. So, you're kind of like threw those out there, but I think he kind of sets the scene about what sort of what's the general attitude and kind of framework we need to go into this with, and some of the
it's a lot to work on, isn't it? There, and it's kind of, I suppose it's also about working out, like, we're all going to be somewhere on the spectrum of each of those attributes. So what are kind of our strengths and weaknesses, and where might we like, I don't know, we might find distress tolerance easier, but really trip up around non-judgment or one of the other ones you said or something. So it's kind of like working out where we are on that, which might tell us what we might do best to work on.
He talks about there's the threat mind versus the compassionate mind, and that like whichever one you find yourself in is how this will kind of affect how you will affect your feelings, your motives, what you think about yourself, your behaviors, the sorts of kind of thoughts and images that do kind of pop into your mind, and how we organize our minds in general. So I guess that's another interesting framework to think about this. If you're finding yourself viewing things through a certain way, like you are becoming non-judgmental, or your distress tolerance is low, or you're being insensitive to yourself, worth kind of remembering that, like, I'm viewing, if you're able to recognize through mindfulness and some body work that you are in a certain, in the threat system, you're able to kind of understand better, this may be why I'm thinking this way about things. I might not be approaching this the most compassionate way, as opposed to being in a more compassionate space. He says that, you're able to have compassionate attention, compassionate thinking, compassionate feelings, behaviors, motivations. So that's gonna, if you're in that space, you're likely to view things in a more, sensitive, empathic, non-judgmental way. And I guess in that space, you'd be better placed to address any distress that you're experiencing.
Yeah. And so they both feed each other, right? So if you're physiologically already stressed, you're probably more likely to have thoughts pop into your head about what's gone wrong or what other threats are or what could go wrong. And then that's going to stress your body out even more, and the cycle will continue. Where if you're already in a place of like, things are okay and I'm feeling non-judgmental, then more of those thoughts will spiral. So it's, I suppose, like the first stepping stone to any of this sounds like it's got to be like mindful awareness, because if you just don't know your body's stressed or that you're in a spiral of negative thinking, then you haven't got any foothold to do any of the other exercises, really, have you?
That's it. Sort of like as the base, and being able to also be in a place to, I suppose, like, accept those, I guess, refer to them as like, more negative, threatening feelings as well. I guess there might be some people who kind of find it too daunting to accept the fact that they feel a certain way, because they're maybe too stuck in kind of the drive system where they're just wanting to get things done and achieve things. But kind of any sort of negativity is sort of a threat to that system as well, like this third system. Which I kind of, I guess, thought about just then, but it's interesting, like, kind of being
raise awareness to it, but implicitly still have the attitude of bloody hell, I'm useless with my mental health. Come on, get this stuff together. Be a compassionate self, so you're not so bloody useless. And it's within noticing, you can still have this implicit threatening attitude, critical attitude towards yourself.
You make an interesting point. Sort of with anything like this that we talk about, there can be a, kind of, I know, strategies or, things we learn that kind of are going to, hopefully improve our well-being, our self-esteem, kind of improve our lives in the context of what we talk about. It's often, it can be easy to sort of like use some of these things as a tool to feel better. It's like, if I, it's kind of like the jokes we make, mindfulness for businessmen, or like mindfulness to achieve that, sort of like it starts to become like you do this kind of quite like wholesome thing in the aid of achieving X, Y, Z, as opposed to kind of like an inner state. And I think particularly with this one, if you're kind of using like, I'm going to be compassionate so I can, like, do this X, Y, Z, or compassionate. So I could see how it could take have a bit of a reverse effect or feel a bit forced.
You've just got me excited about a key piece of theory that, like, I think in rereading this book, I got most excited about, which is what he called social mentalities.
Yes.
And so, like, we evolved to with different kind of frameworks for how to interact with people. So when we're children, for example, we might have a care eliciting mentality, which is like, I'm relating to you as if you're someone who's there to help me. And it's not just as children, but like fundamental, like, is there a lot as children? And then we might fall into that place of like needing help and coming from that place. And that will have its own set of motives and strategies. Equally, we have a caregiving mentality. So, if you're parenting someone, it will elicit your caregiving mentality, and that has a whole set of motives and emotions to it. And then we've got like our cooperative mentality. So if we're trying to get a project done together, we might like be in a real cooperative state of mind, which has its own set of emotions and motives. And then we've got a like competitive social mentality, and this is like all about like climbing up the dominance hierarchy, right? And this is where we might have things like jealousy and wanting other people to fail and really wanting to like strive to beat them and all this set of stuff. And so what we were just talking about then, that like we could end up, yes, looking to these compassionate techniques, but we can end up doing it from this competitive social mentality where I'm just trying to like be better, so I'm not good enough, or trying to hit this perfectionism. And then like there's a sort of irony to which you're using those techniques off the base of this threat-based drive, which is fundamentally feeling not good enough or something like that.
And exactly. It's kind of it's control based as well, isn't it? Sort of like I have to. It's not from like an acceptance point of view. It's like if there's something wrong, therefore I need to control it, and that can lead to kind of end up of like fighting with oneself to be a certain way. So if I'm more compassionate, then I'm going to be better equipped to do. It can take on a. He talks about this, that it uses compassionate language, like the actual words we use are compassionate in which to approach this. So if we're kind of talking about language like control and fighting with oneself and competing, and like those are quite like harsh words when it comes to a sense of like acceptance and warmth and treating oneself compassionately. It's not the overarching attitude that he talks about in this approach, for sure. And so we can raise awareness not just to the emotional state we're in, but like the kind of the social mentality we're in, like. And they can mix and match, right? You can be in a place where you're both simultaneously happy for a friend's achievement, but also like it triggers shame in you because it feels like you're lower on the hierarchy than them or something. And so and so we can also have these attitudes towards ourselves. And so like you're laying out there, if we're doing that like from a non-accepting place because we feel quite inferior and we're trying to like boost ourselves up from this competitive space, then we're not in the, I don't know, either caregiving or like cooperative or sort of, encouraging coach, but certainly not in a critical, like you're not good enough kind of competitive space. This makes me think a bit about the kind of base in which we would practice compassionate practices out of. And I guess one of those would be, he's saying, kind of, creating a safe space to do so. And connecting with soothing rhythm breathing. So I'm wondering if like we can kind of because I'm aware we're sort of kind of going through this a little bit kind of like this, but it feels like it flows into it a bit. So I guess like thinking about the base in which to, for example, you're feeling some self-criticism, you might be overthinking something you maybe said in a meeting that didn't get the best response, therefore you're becoming critical of yourself. That I'm always stupid in meetings, I always say the inappropriate thing. That is kind of maybe the example we carry through. What he's kind of saying is like when it's time to kind of approach this, like coming from a space, making sure you do have a safe space, because that prevents it from kind of being exacerbated. And it's like a non-threatening environment in which to approach this. So kind of like where you do this practice is important. And then I guess leading on to that, kind of engaging in, physiologically settling activities such as soothing breathing. So I wonder if we could maybe just start on those two. Yeah,
great. And what you were just saying then had me think that also there's kind of two key aspects for when we might do these exercises. Similar with mindfulness, I suppose. Like we can have because he's talking about cultivating this compassionate mind. So this might mean we set, in the same way we go to the gym, we set, I don't know, so many minutes aside per day to practice this breathing or this imagery, to like practice just from not in a triggered place at all, but just as a sort of daily habit of practicing engaging our soothing system and this compassionate mind. So that could be one context in which you do these exercises. But then of course the other, which we've been focused on so far, is like in response to catching ourselves in the moment in real time, like, oh, I've triggered my threat system, I'm ruminating, or I'm thinking, like you said, in a meeting or something. And that would be kind of the second place we might use these exercises. So I suppose how we do them might depend on which one of these contexts we're in.
Yeah, true. Yeah. Okay, I guess be curious, kind of like just step aside a little bit and just think about, is there any kind of examples you can provide of times you've maybe used some of these kind of skills or strategies with somebody you've worked with in order to kind of support them to become more compassionate in a self-critical moment? Is there an example you can give, or kind of obviously, you know, sort of like what's going through your mind if you were to work with the person I've just explained?
I think I'd rather run with myself as an example for a few reasons, but mainly because this podcast is about kind of like what people might do for themselves, right? So
yeah, of course.
Simple example was last night. I woke up at 5 a.m, and oftentimes when I wake up, you know, I can just roll over and go up to sleep, right? But this is one of those times where 10 minutes in, I'd caught myself like ruminating about something. I literally can't even remember what now. But and it's not just to hide the fact I literally can't remember what it was, but I was obviously playing something through my mind, and then I noticed it, right? So that was my default mindfulness skill eventually coming in. It's like, oh, look, you've now, you're not in that soothing place you need to be to sleep. You've started winding yourself up about something, and now I've noticed it. So I got to that point. Yeah. Then and because like, this is like a habit I have now. So I wasn't sort of consciously going through methodically, but I think in hindsight, what I did was I started slowing my breathing back down, and we can talk about why that helps, but it engages our parasympathetic nervous system, right? Which is what we need to sleep or to feel soothed. Mm-hmm. And then I engaged through a body scan. So I sort of scanned through my toes and my legs and slowly worked my way up my body. Now, what that does is it gives you a pause from the constantly triggering yourself in your threat system, right? Okay. So it's not engaging imagery yet to be sort of compassionate to myself. It's just stopping my threat system from constantly triggering itself, which I think might have been like the first change process you mentioned in that list of 4.
Yes. Yeah.
And so I think after that I fell asleep. So I didn't go as far as to like need to like speak kindly to myself or imagine a safe place like on a beach or something, which could be other exercises. But what I did was I slowed down I recognized, I suppose in the wisdom of compassion, as Paul Gilbert calls it, I recognized I was doing something that was not for my well-being. So I had a compassionate intention to do something about that.
Yes. Yeah.
And with my skills, I slowed down my breathing. I chose to engage in a mindful body scan, which almost distracted me from my ruminating, which got me calm enough such that I fell back asleep. So that's an example of a few hours ago where it fits into this framework. Yeah.
And also, I guess another aspect that would be, you know, the courage to have done that as well, like being willing to kind of, sit with that uncomfortable feeling and try and do something about it, rather than sometimes our behaviors, even though they cannot be helpful to us, they feel like they make things better. So often like rumination or overthinking is a control strategy to feel better. You might think, if I think about it more, then I'll resolve it in my mind. Whereas actually you're being courageous in order to
that's
try a different way. Yeah.
Because it sounds counterintuitive to want to continue to ruminate rather than go back to sleep. But there definitely is that pull. And like it does require some effort to pause and to choose to do some sort of mindfulness instead. Like there is that part of me is like, no, just keep
hard way out.
It's bizarre, but there is a part of my mind that was just wanted to keep on that track. Didn't want it to let it go.
I guess it kind of on that as well. I guess I'm curious how pausing, engaging in the breathing, and I know there's other parts of this you could have gone into, but how does that help address the overthinking that you're experiencing? Because there'd be like the nature of the thoughts, whatever you were thinking about. Right. Like how does it address the content of the thought, not just the kind of
that's a good point.
Worrying,
I suppose it was. I wish I actually could remember now. I suppose whatever it was not so important that once I noticed it, you could use my rationality to say like, this isn't the time to think about this, and just believe that. And so last night, for whatever reason, that was enough. If it wasn't, I suppose like what I would do now using my David Allen getting things done skills is just jot it down. Like I would just make a note, stick it in my inbox, and then I was like, I know my system will have this in mind, like, and I can trust that I can go to sleep and it won't be forgotten. It's in the system. So that would have been my strategy if I couldn't let it go.
Okay. And I think also what might be useful at that point is aspects of acceptance and commitment therapy around, you know, is this thought helpful? Have I had this thought before?
Right.
Does this thought move me in the direction of my life and my values? Does this kind of overthinking make me the person I want to be? You know, like kind of seeing it through those frames as well. That might be another strategy you could have. Yeah,
I think sort of implicitly that was what happened in a quick days without doing it that methodically as I have it now. But like, there are those times, aren't there, where it's like, oh, actually, if I do forget this thought, like I might not do this thing, which does need to get done. So like, there's a part of me that doesn't want to let it go. And so having, deciding if it's one or the other is quite important, I suppose.
Is it like helpful, you know, skillful thinking they talk about in bullet practice? I'll be interested just to hear from you, like what are some of the skills that you kind of stood out to you and you find interesting? There's a couple I've got in mind, but just curious if there's any that kind of stand out to you as like the key ones that you would use with yourself or with other people.
Yeah, I think, well, probably there are ones that probably stand out the most as being prototypical of the therapy. And that's like building some sort of image in your mind. So what will they call this? Building a compassionate image. And this could be like a fantasy. It could be like, it could have human form. It could be like a tree or a mountain or the sun or it could be like a fictional character from a film or something. It could be a religious figure. It doesn't really matter because, as we've pointed out, your emotional systems don't really know the difference between fantasy and reality. So as long as you like have something in mind that you sense as being compassionate towards you, then it should do the trick. Aside from other fears and obstacles to it, which we could get into. But that building a compassionate image of someone who can be like, I suppose, has your best interests in mind, someone who sees that, you know, certain things weren't your fault, but still encourages you to take on responsibility, that kind of metaphorically has their arm around you and understands what you're going through. That's probably like the intervention that's most archetypal of this therapy, I think. Personally, I tend not to lean towards imagery as much. It's just not in my, I've either not practiced it as much, or it's not like my makeup doesn't go towards that as much. So I'm much more in the camp of like the breathing, the mindfulness, the sort of checking that my attitude towards myself is the way I would like it to be towards a friend or someone I wanted to do well, rather than someone I was criticizing. Those are my go-tos, I think.
I think it's within that, there's, from that last point you made, there's aspects of you know, the 6 pillars of self-esteem, where he talks about, you know, kind of one aspect of self-esteem is feeling that you are deserving of the good things that come your way, and you're deserving of support and help. And I think that's, if you talk about like an attitude, like within this framework, you know, kind of holding an attitude that we are deserving of soothing and being calmed, and, you know, we it's okay for us to want to feel better about this. You know, it kind of sound often that might get missed. People might kind of prefer to be stuck in that space because it feels safer. And I think sort of there's a kind of general attitude of like, oh, I am worthy of feeling okay. Like I am okay. I'm like a good person. I'm deserving of the support I get from other people. Like that's that's an attitude worth cultivating as well.
Yeah, great. Yeah. And I suppose I think this might be quite common, and one of my initial like resistances to this is the sense that if I take this attitude, I might like get less done, or just let myself off the hook with stuff. So
be lazy,
yeah.
Yeah.
So sort of and I suppose this is more of an intellectual barrier that I got over, but just recognizing that no, this isn't about that. It's still in your self-interest, and your self-interest isn't just eat anything you want, like let yourself never work out, and like don't get any of your responsibilities done. Like that's not in your self-interest. So sometimes compassion isn't just like letting yourself get away with everything. It's
not nice necessarily.
No, but so it can be encouraging, but that's what it is. It's encouraging. It's not cruel. It's like the way I would want a decent sports coach to be. Like they've got my back fundamentally, but they still want to get the best out of me from a place of like, seeing my potential. Yeah.
I think it ties in a bit what it's kind of like the theme we were trying to discuss last year when Luke discussed 2021 was we kind of spoke a lot about the whole striving versus acceptance thing. How can we like push ourselves and drive ourselves to achieve our goals and set big targets and get organized and stick to our habits, but also kind of like the acceptance that like we can't be in top form all the time, or perfectionistic traits and that sort of thing. And I think what this really, the way I would sum this up to myself is like, what is despite the difficulty I might be facing in the moment, despite the challenging thoughts I might be having, the worries I might be having, despite the anticipation of a difficult day tomorrow, or the difficult moment at work or with a friend or colleague or whatever, like what is the kindest way to proceed? Like what is, like I can still do this task, I can still confront this feeling, like that doesn't have to change. I can still push myself, I can still drive to achieve things, but like I can do that in a kind, compassionate way with myself. Like I can either choose to do it in a kind of like kind of back to what you were saying, like a critical where I must do this or try and control the situation. Like lots of musts and shoulds. And he says that's language we shouldn't be using, particularly in reflective letter writing. Compassionate letter writing, like not full of shoulds and musts and have tos, but like I can still do what I need to do in a kind, compassionate way that doesn't kind of enter into that threat system, which tends to be a block to managing any difficulty, whether that's a feeling or a difficult emotion or challenging situation. And
that ties into the positive psychology stuff you wrote about with Martin Seligman, and it's about what motive is my drive system coming from. So if it's from our true values, then it doesn't need a threat, because of course we want to live in line with our values. It's like an axiomatic, right? And so you can approach that with kindness and still, as you point out, not avoid something, but go towards it because you value whatever it might be in the context. You value the honesty, even though the conversation's difficult or something like that. Where as opposed to an internally competitive, I'm not good enough driver, which is just having you trying to achieve so you feel worthy of existence, which is a very different motive. Even though it might get the same tasks done at the end of the day, it's a much it's a place of much more suffering, isn't it?
There's go no you go.
I was just going to ask you, like I gave you a few examples, and I wonder from reading this book if you, I suppose, which things did you notice that you find like, yes, I already use that and I like that, and which things were new that you were like, I'd like to take that on?
Yeah, so I think one key aspect I'd probably say that I guess I'm not going to kind of say on a public forum that I'm like good at it, but like I think so something I think I've recognized is the the power of my meditation practice. So I had an interview recently, and in the middle of the interview, I felt like I'd maybe said something not quite the way I wanted to say it, and I didn't quite get. It wasn't like a dramatic thing, but it was like just a small thing that I would usually feel a little bit like,
I wish I'd said it
wrong
this way.
thing. I just said it differently, or that came out a bit off or something. Not like bad, but just wasn't quite right. And I was able to, in that moment, be like, all right. Like I literally took a breath, and I like kind of had that like outside awareness. And in short, I was basically able to kind of appraise the situation and kind of look at myself and go, okay, you're halfway through the interview here. Like, I don't want to enter into overthinking about that one thing I said for the whole rest of the interview. And I kind of felt this like, I guess this like pang of just like, oh God, I said that thing, but I kind of was quickly able to soothe that and go, oh, no, you've got this. You're right. It's okay. Like,
nice.
You've answered all the other questions really well. There's more to come. Bring them on. Like, I'm ready to answer them. Like, it was kind of like I was intentional as well. I didn't it wasn't just kind of like a there. It was like, okay, you said it now. Like, let's move on to the next thing. It's like really intentional, like to kind of not linger.
Yeah. Recognizing that dwelling on it would perhaps compromise the rest of the interview. So that wouldn't be in line with your well-being, right? Yeah. So to sort of recognize that, well, you've done the other things well, so you've put it in context, and you're recognizing that, and you've got another half to do. So, let's take a breath, switch on, like get back in the present. Let's get in the game. Yeah.
And I guess it was interesting. The language I had to myself in that moment was quickly shifted from kind of like, oh, you idiot, to like, come on, you've got this. You've got the rest of the interview. You've done all right so far. Yeah.
Nice one.
I guess the key takeaway really is just sort of, I guess I've kind of pulled up something here, but it's sort of noticing which system I'm in. Like, if I'm kind of getting in a bit of like a critical state, or I'm maybe overthinking or ruminating on something, or catastrophizing, like knowing that is being viewed through a certain lens, and I have a choice to see it through a different lens, and kind of noticing the different parts of myself that might be activated in those moments. So it might be like a physical sensation, or it might be kind of maybe trying to control the situation, or to change something, or to seek something to soothe me externally. Whereas actually it's kind of more around like, oh, I do have the skills, the knowledge, and the intention to kind of soothe in that situation.
Yeah. It's kind of like, sounds like a diffusion, like a helpful way to diffuse. So rather than engaging in the content of what you're running through your head, checking what state you're in first. And it's like, okay, well, I'm in the threat system, so the rationalizing I do from this place probably won't be that productive. So rather than engaging with this stuff, calm myself down first, and then problem solve from that point, when I can see things through a different perspective.
Mm-hmm. And I think there's elements. Even think about like Sam Harris's Waking Up as well. Yeah, like kind of also seeing, kind of like thoughts, images, sensations, feelings. Like they're all, according to him, like just appearances in consciousness. Like just that kind of like stepping back, like kind of that. The awareness of awareness itself, and not kind of becoming so exactly like fused to these, I don't know, critical or negative ways of thinking. Like they're not. You are not your next thought. You're not. Yeah. That's not you. That's just something that's kind of like passing through you. It's not something you need to kind of attach to. And there is a way to step back. And I guess it's kind of hard because there's different footholds here. And I think certainly when you're talking about non-dual awareness in the context of this, it's kind of, I don't know how you kind of explain both with keep a foothold on each, I suppose. But it's sort of, I guess that
they both come from a fundamentally Buddhist root. We haven't really talked about that, but Paul Gilbert drew a lot from Buddhism into this theory.
This kind of, I guess it's sort of, there's something to kind of pay attention to here, and you're referring to a system that operates, not just kind of like a broad awareness. I think it might be slightly on the fringe of my knowledge to kind of talk much further about it, but I think it's you can utilize both, I suppose.
So if I'm catching you right, is one you've got your ultimate, well, let's call it your ultimate non-dual state, where it's like you're not even thinking about thinking, you're just aware of the entire landscape of the process of consciousness, which is kind of what you're aiming at in the deep mindfulness meditation places. Which but then there are, like, I suppose, more dualistic states where it's like, oh look, Luke 1 can notice what Luke 2 is saying to himself here.
Yeah.
And like
Luke's threat system can notice what Luke's compassionate system is.
Exactly. And like, even though I've not reached a non-dual place to get there, it's still a metacognitive process. Yeah, this is getting way too complicated. Metacognitive process that, like, I can utilize to get into my soothing system. Yeah.
That was good. I think there's one thing I highlighted that I thought might be worth kind of reading out, and I guess that'll probably be all my highlights and biggest hits. So it says in metacognitive therapy. So I guess I'm only saying this because you spoke about metacognitive therapy. It says makes clear that rumination looking back and worry looking forward exert their impact when they constantly stimulate the threat system and interfere with normal recovery processes. So implying that there is a natural recovery process, like as well. In this approach, problems arise because attention is overly focused on the self and the threat to self from within and without. This sense of threat is maintained through rumination and worry, and self-regulation strategies fail to modify this processing loop and self-experiences that give rise to it. So I guess it kind of that really highlights like what feeds that loop that people can get stuck in as well.
Yeah, and we haven't really talked about
what stimulates the threat system. Yeah.
Yes, well, exactly. And it's not just I'm going to get eaten by a lion like a zebra might have. It's like they're talking about a self there, right, or an ego. Like I have an image of how you see me. And like, if I think your image of me is sort of small and pathetic, that is a threat to me. So like, it's a very complicated process that still triggers this quite like basic threat system. But so it's not just like, oh, I can think about threatening things, but almost the object of the threat has changed. It's not just my body and my survival. It's like my ego and how I think other people might see me or how I see myself.
That sense of it kind of feels like it can feel like a kind of attack on your whole being rather than parts of yourself, I think. They've been linked to the search for the secure base there as well. I think about having like a kind of a stable place in which to view the world, and like he talks about this, doesn't he, Paul Gilbert, like about like attachment systems and how that is kind of part of what activates the threat system as well when people's attachment styles are kind of under threat and are being challenged or triggered.
Yeah. So, I mean, that I'd almost go as far as to say they're like building an internal secure base or a compassionate mind are the same thing. Like, and if we've had a very, secure upbringing, that might come very naturally to us to not be self-critical and to sort of implicitly treat ourselves like we're okay.
It's been modeled to you, hasn't it, as well? And then
it's been modeled, it's been internalized. Whereas there might be either your whole self or just pockets of experiences where you find that really difficult for whatever traumas, and that's where this stuff comes in. Where in the same way as if we had some joints out of alignment and we need to go get that sorted out, we might choose to like find the pockets of experience where we stay in the threat system, we trigger ourselves and take some, I suppose, responsibility for that and learn about how our minds work and what we need to do. But I think this like attachment theory is sort of really at the heart of this compassion focused therapy, and like learning to build an internal secure base is very similar to building this compassionate self.
Cool, mate. I think we gave that a pretty good crack. Is there anything else you kind of wanted to bring up at all, or any final thoughts you had?
I think we've done it. I'm pretty. I feel like we covered more than I expected to in about an hour.
Yeah. It's good. It's a hard one. I didn't quite know where to start, but I think it was good. And it's nice to always draw links between other I guess theories and approaches. And I guess we read books that kind of have undertones of act in it, or undertones of compassion. What was it? Christian Neff. We did radical acceptance and things like that. So there's books we read that kind of have undertones of this, but I guess it's one of the first times we've kind of read a direct thing about like a certain kind of therapy. I know he doesn't necessarily want to refer to it as that, or like a certain approach. So I guess that was an interesting one for me, because we're not kind of reading it through the lens of something else, or with kind of a different title, because we did the happiness trap, which is all based on acceptance and commitment therapy, but it's aimed towards the general public as a self-help book, whereas this is aimed at therapists for exactly. So and these are the ones that
went from the root of it, didn't we?
And these are the ones that often the most challenging, like even Search for Secure Base, like that was a really challenging book, because for the same reasons, like it's really technical. So this was dense, so there was a bit more challenging, but always happy to chat, and hope whoever's listening got something from that. All right. Nice one, mate. Cheers.
Take care.
Cool. Look after yourself, stay compassionate.
Will do.
See you, mate.